And that's what our next sessions is about. So to walk us through the state of finance for marketers in APAC 2026, please welcome to the stage Joen Driel, VP Sales APAC at AppsFlyer. Welcome.
Give it up to you.
Hi, good morning. Welcome. My name is Joen Driel, and I'm looking after sales teams here in Asia Pacific. And wow, I hope this translation works well. I don't know, it's the first time I see it. So what I will do this morning is walk you through some of the data points that we have seen last year and some of the trends. For me personally, I'm based here in Bangkok, and I'm looking after the Asia Pacific region, and that gives me a privilege to travel around and to speak to a lot of customers like yourself. In fact, 7 or 8 out of 10 meetings that I do is with financial services customers. So I got a lot of feedback and a lot of insights, and I see a lot of things happening. As Ronan mentioned, I think the story has changed dramatically in the past 12, 24 months. If you look at the APAC digital economy, it's roughly about 300 billion in value. But something interestingly is happening, that this was a tremendous growth, but it's kind of halting. And things are changing. When I speak to my customers and prospects, it's not about raw acquisition anymore, growing at all cost. What I see is that there is more focus on where to get the value users. Because what's the point of getting a lot of users on your app, but these users are not doing anything? You can't monetize them. So that is kind of a huge shift that we're seeing, and I will share with the data points that we have. That's the case. So first, I'll look how the market is evolving. Second, I will share some acquisition strategies and how the budgets actually are changing. And third, I see another big trend in terms of the rise of lifecycle engagement and retention, and why is that so important. And finally, what monetization, fraud, and AI trends tell us. So there's a lot of data that I'm going to cover in the next 10, 15 minutes. Also have quite a bit of notes, so please bear with me, but it will be kind of an interesting journey to see it all comes together. So let's get started. This is kind of the headline. The finance apps installs declined by roughly about 17% last year in 2025. And as I mentioned, this is not something new. This is happening. I think this is actually the first correction after several years of hyper growth. And this is an interesting factor that things are shifting. The story is shifting. But actually, the demand hasn't disappeared. It has shifted. For example, in Indonesia, the paid install rate actually climbed to 21% in Q4 last year, nearly double the 2024 numbers. And this is and I think this is an important distinction to manage, this is in a growth market. Same for Vietnam. Vietnam followed the same trajectory, rising from 12% to 21%. But if you look at mature markets, the opposite actually is happening. Like, for example, in Australia, the paid install rate fell from 49% to 15%. So basically prioritizing efficiency over volume. Let's look at something else. Across APAC, the finance app, the UA spend declined by 27% year over year. In non-growth markets, like the largest pullbacks came from large Android-led markets, like India, Vietnam, and Thailand. Historically, these markets drove aggressive growth through acquisition and spending. Meanwhile, the more mature markets like Japan and Korea remained relatively stable, reflecting more a mature kind of acquisition environment. So the pullback wasn't uniform. It was concentrated in the largest growth ecosystems. Coming back at the story has changed is that we want, as a financial services industry, going from hypergrowth and user acquisition to more value users. That's the storyline. And this says it all, because if you want to go through more value users, the platform that you have to go through is iOS. And it shows. iOS reaches a record of 60% share of total finance installs. It was never has done before. Meanwhile, Android installs fell roughly about 20% year over year, because finance apps monetize better on iOS. And that's where the shift is happening. Another interesting development that we are seeing is that for local players like some of you in local markets, the competition is becoming increasingly more fierce. For example, in Southeast Asia, half of the budget spent in Southeast Asia actually is coming from China, 47%. So we as marketers, we increasingly have this competition internationally. Like, for example, in Australia, most of the budget spent in Australia is actually coming from the UK. So the competitive landscape across APAC is becoming increasingly international. This comes to my second point in terms of the story is shifting, is we see a dramatic shift of budget, not spending on raw acquisition, but spending on remarketing, retargeting. Actually, in fact, the remarketing investment in APAC surged to almost 200%. And why? The answer is lifecycle engagement. Some other numbers, Indonesia and the Philippines lead in absolute spend, while Thailand recorded the highest growth at almost 300% or 339%, followed by the Philippines at 241%. A huge growth, a huge change. This points to a structural shift. This is a structural shift. Companies are investing in existing users, not just new installs. So the gap between UA and remarketing spend is narrowing fast. And as a result, you can see that, for example, the retention rate, like the day 30 retention rate, increased almost by 70% in Southeast Asia, from 2.35% to almost like 4%. It's a huge increase. Even Japan and South Korea still lead the APAC, holding steady at around 7% day 30 retention. And this has to do by the shift in quality users and the shift in remarketing. And this is the result of it. And that also has an impact on how we're going to monetize this. So if you look at monetization, it's another interesting data point that, for example, Indonesia almost generates 40% of APAC Android finance in-app monetization, followed by India at 27%. Another interesting thing with South Korea is growing the fastest, up 52% on Android and even 63% on iOS. So driven by stronger monetization, intensity on premium devices. Lastly, and this is something that I'm very excited about, is that we finally see a drop in fraud, 22% in Asia Pacific. And if I can give maybe a little bit of a background story from an AppsFlyer lens, is that, for example, in the last 24 months, our product team has kind of re-engineered our fraud solution, and also with the AI area and the models that we have built, trained on our data sets. And by the way, we are doing roughly about 1 trillion transactions every week. So we have a lot of data, and our models are trained on this. So we almost build an unfair advantage in terms of seeing emerging trends of fraud happening that we are sharing with our customers. And if you do that well, then you dramatically improve your return on ad spend. So that's a very good thing. And talking about AI, I think this is something that it's unavoidable. In fact, if you don't implement or don't use, you are lagging behind. There are way more signals to interpret, more channels to optimize, and more decisions that directly affect revenue. And you need AI in order to comprehend and make sense of it all. We are lucky in AppsFlyer that we have built an AI chatbot right into our HQ CRM systems. And also, I think we found some interesting data points while we have introduced it last year in you actually using it. So the effectiveness of AI that we find out doesn't just depend on the model. It depends on how you, as marketers, actually frame the questions. And that also helps improves your ability to do the right things and get better in making the decisions that you want and become more effective. So I'm almost coming to the end. A lot of data points. So what does it all mean for you as finance marketers in APAC? So first, prioritize high-value markets. Second, rebalance toward life cycle marketing. Third, marketers increasingly need to compete with global acquisition budgets. Fourth, the focus must shift towards monetization. It's not about just getting users for the sake of getting users, but actually you want to have your users doing something in your app, like opening an account, deposit some money, do some transactions. And fifth, retention really improves some of the monetizations that you would like to do. So, if we step back, the story across APAC, finance marketing, is becoming very clear. This region is still one of the most dynamic digital economies in the world. In the next phase of success won't be defined by how many users you acquire. It will be defined by how effectively you turn growth into sustainable value. And if I look at Asia Pacific, that transition is actually already happening. And we are at the forefront of this, and AppsFlyer is helping in that. So I'm happy to announce, and I think Ronan already mentioned this, is that today is the first day that we are showing you these data points. Actually, in fact, we have a huge report that is coming out today, and I'm welcoming you to scan the QR code so that you can download the full report. It's a lot of data, a lot of points that is of interest. And with that, thank you so much, and hopefully I can see you in person in the coming hours. Thank you.